Hi, this is Emily from the Charter Network Accelerator, and I wanted to give you a little insight about an option for adapting Achievement First's open source curriculum, specifically for middle school lit, which is grades 5 through 8. Starting this summer and into next year, we'll have support structures in place for people who want to take and adapt AF's middle school literature program. I want to start by some framing about how it can be helpful to have solid curriculum in place. I know of 4 major networks, including YesPrep, where I worked for quite some time, and Achievement First, where I work now, that originally wanted teachers to develop their own materials and their own lesson plans. And while still truly believe the importance of teaching people to fish rather than giving them the fish, ultimately found that with really big numbers of brand new teachers, it was really difficult to ask teachers to lesson plan with quality when they had so many other teacher moves in facilitating the lesson with solid culture, etc., that are more of the developmental focus. Each of these networks decided to create curriculum to give to teachers as a starting point, not as a non-negotiable, but as a starting point. And I say this to say that sometimes building curriculum is the right move and it's necessary based on where you are or what's happening, but it takes a ton of time and a ton of effort. And if we can save you even a bit of that time and a bit of that effort, we would really love for you to take a look at what is available in open source, which Achievement First materials are available, they're open source, and they're awesome. They're rigorous, and they are going to help lead to student achievement. So starting in June this year, 2017, we'll have some trainings in place for folks who want to use the 5th through 8th grade materials. There are scopes and sequences, unit plans, and daily lesson plans for those texts. And a little bit later, I'll show you what they look like. But so in the next couple of months, start to decide if this is something that makes sense. We'll kick off with a live training in June in New York, where we'll get to understand more of the vision for the materials and actually practice with some of the lesson materials. And from there will be ongoing supports when you go back to your networks. The thing that I love the most about the Achievement First middle school lit lesson plans is that it solves a lot of the mysteries that teachers can't necessarily solve themselves as easily at the beginning. It really demystifies some of the processes of reading that are mystifying. So 4 of them that I want to highlight. One is just that it tells the teachers which texts are high quality texts. And the teaching and learning team who developed these materials have read very widely and made some switches. Even for next year, there are going to be some switches that really have narrowed the text list to be purposeful and rich and culturally responsive, but also showing just a range of experiences. So our text lists are both windows into the world and mirrors for students. And then after those texts have been selected, 3 other things that the daily lesson plans in middle school lit really help solidify, which is incredibly important for developing teachers, is that they're based around a solid central question. That solid central question has an exemplar student response every day. So every single day there's a central question, and every single day students write their response to that, which is great practice, of course, for PARCC and SBAC. Students have to use evidence, and there is a real push for rigor and clarity in those student exemplars, which teachers can then internalize. And then the rest of the lesson is developed into bite-sized chunks, again, based around text-dependent questions with the evidence that supports them, and then what we call back pocket questions that you can toss out if students need extra scaffolds. So the lesson is broken into read this chunk with these questions and this chunk with these questions. So the text itself is chunked already. Another thing that teachers really find difficult at the beginning. So these things are already spelled out for teachers. Across K-12 at Achievement First, across our 32 schools, 88% of teachers strongly agree that the daily lesson resources in their grade and subject are strong and provide them with what they need to push rigor in their classroom. So 89% of teachers and 86% of leaders agree and strongly agree that the plans are rigorous. And like I said, this is across every grade level and every content area and a ton of teachers in schools, which means that there's resounding positive feedback happening about these lessons. You should also know that these lessons have been vetted over a number of years and they're under continual revision. So we're ever evolving them to make them better and better. This is the text lists that, should you opt in for middle school lit, will be the focus of study. And what I love about these lists, which I referenced earlier, is that it's a list made up of windows and mirrors. Scholars will have the opportunity to engage with some canonical texts, and they'll also have the opportunity to engage with the really high interest texts and everything in between. If you haven't read Wonder, for example, it's absolutely beautiful text about being different and what that means. And it's super powerful, and you'll probably cry if you read it. At least I did. And you'll note that there's also a clear push for rigor happening. Narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass in 7th grade, but it's done with attention to rhetoric and attention to context reading and all sorts of things. So I'm super excited about this text list. And this text list, of course, doesn't include all the supplemental texts, the poetry, the nonfiction, etc., that students are also reading. Over the summer, we'll focus on the Unit 1 text for each grade level, which in 5 is Wonder, 6 is The Outsiders. 7th grade, a new text is going to be Fahrenheit 451, and then 8th grade, the first unit is dark, short stories, starting with The Telltale Heart. So we'll get to engage with those together, talk about them, dig into them, and be ready to take them back to our teachers in a way that they know how to teach them successfully. I know people are probably thinking about costs because while our curriculum is completely open source, every lesson plan, every unit plan, everything, even for grade levels that we don't have this specific support structure in place, of course, it's free and it's yours and you can have it at any time. But there is a cost associated with AF Middle School Lit program support, and that is the cost to order copies of text. So this is a text list based on ordering class set copies or ordering individual copies, and it's just an estimate. And we'll share this spreadsheet with you, but just wanted to have on your radar what it might cost to order the texts for your scholars to study. I did want to take a second to look at some of the examples so you can see what the curriculum looks like. So this is an example of a unit plan that's made available to the teachers who teach the unit and the leaders who support the teachers in the unit. It starts with clear understanding of what scholars will focus on during the unit, including the Common Core state standards to be delved into. And then from there, talks about the unit essential questions and their enduring understandings. The core skills, of course, these are Common Core state standards for skills that will be worked on. And then even the corresponding lessons that will circle around, zero in on that skill. Should note that at AF, the standard itself is not a huge focus. This is not a skill building or skill driven curriculum. It is a text centric curriculum where scholars are unpacking the layers and components of that text, which you'll see in a minute. Every unit then also has a performance task. So there is authentic opportunities for students to explore, typically in writing and also usually some sort of presentation, what they've learned in that unit. So then there's going to be student materials and exemplars and rubrics. So all of the components of a unit-long study performance task are made available. Definitions that might be needed for the unit, some thoughts about planning, and then there's the daily calendar or the lesson calendar. What type of reading is going to be explored in that lesson, the text itself, the Common Core standards of focus, and then the draft of that central question for the text that day. There's three different types of reading that happen throughout the lesson. There's strategic reading, which are those texture texts, that nonfiction or historical reading to understand better what's happening in the unit. And you'll note that many units start with those strategic readings. Then there are what we call reading workouts, which is reading for more breadth over the course of a text. And then there are close reading lessons scattered throughout. There are other close reading bursts that happen within other lessons, but there's some lessons that are specifically close reading driven. And then, so this is laid out for all of the units as a whole. And again, something I love about AF is that we've demystified for teachers what pages to focus on and where to start and stop and how to chunk, etc. And then at the end, there's some analysis of text complexity. When this goes into the daily lesson, you'll note that this specific section of text is listed, of course, and then here's the guiding text-dependent question for the day, which scholars are grappling with. There's a literal understanding of the text already dispelled for our teachers who might not be content experts or might not have read a text before. They'll be able to check their own understanding here, and then they'll be able to check their understanding against the exemplar response that is made available at the beginning of every single lesson plan. And you'll note too, this is a 7th grade plan, and the exemplar response is having students grapple with syntax and allusion and purpose, and it's really rich and rigorous. Tier 2 and 3 vocabulary is also laid out here, and then the lesson itself is structured in a way that allows for what we call heavy lifting loops, where you pose a problem or question for scholars and they're grappling with it in a specific section of text. And those loops usually end in discussion. Then there's another loop or another focus with more discussion. Also built into the lessons are what we call pause and go deeper moments, which is, this is a place that scholars might not pick up on their own, and so I'm going to unpack this illusion, for example, and give teachers and scholars some more scaffolds to make sure they're successful with that. And then every lesson, every day ends with this write component where scholars are writing their responses to the central question of the day. And then homework is listed as well. You'll note that this curriculum is not scripted. It doesn't say, literally, teachers say this thing here, which I personally like because it does allow for a little more flexibility. What it does do is say, we think you should ask this central question about this section of text. And here's some evidence that scholars might grapple with. And here are some what we call back pocket questions to allow students to have an extra scaffold if they need it. And these lessons are relatively easily adapted too. You could combine these sections together. You could have more discussion and less annotating. You could reframe how you're giving questions to scholars, etc. But the hardest parts of the lesson, knowing which questions to ask and what it will look like when scholars are successful, are already laid out for teachers. So this is just kind of an overview of what's available and why we're so excited to support teachers and schools using these materials, which for the most part in ELA is going to look like how we intellectually prepare the lesson. What are we doing with teachers when we take a lesson that's already been given to us to internalize it, make it our own, and be ready to facilitate it? That's where our focus will be. If you have questions about AF Middle School Lit program support, I would love for you to reach out to me, Emily Schisler. I want to engage with you more and help you think about whether this is the right choice for you. But I hope you think about it. Talk to you soon.